The blood on Clara Bennett's hands belonged to a man who would have bled out in the dirt if she had not pressed her apron against the bullet wound in his shoulder. And the preacher standing in the doorway of the Silver Star Saloon called her shameful anyway. The summer heat of Abilene, Kansas in 1878 made the air thick enough to choke on, and Clara could feel sweat trickling down her spine beneath her modest work dress as she straightened from where she had been kneeling beside the injured ranch hand. The sawdust on the saloon floor stuck to her knees, and her hands trembled slightly as she wiped them on the already ruined fabric of her apron. The man she had helped was being carried out by two of his friends, conscious now and mumbling his thanks, but Preacher Josiah Blackwood did not seem to notice or care about that detail. "You bring shame upon yourself and this town," the preacher announced, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet saloon. The piano had stopped mid-song, and even the card players had paused their games to watch the confrontation. A decent woman does not work in a place of sin and debauchery. You serve liquor to men who should be home with their families. You encourage vice and wickedness. Clara felt her cheeks burn, though whether from anger or humiliation she could not quite say. She was 22 years old, and she had been working at the Silver Star for nearly 3 years, ever since her father had died and left her with nothing but debts and a small house that the bank had seized within a month. She was not a soiled dove, not one of the women who worked upstairs. She served drinks, kept the books for the owner, and sometimes sang when the crowd demanded it. She worked hard. She paid her rent on time for the small room she lived in above the general store, and she had never once compromised her virtue, no matter how many drunken propositions she had turned down. "Preacher Blackwood," she said, keeping her voice steady despite the way her heart hammered against her ribs, "that man was bleeding. Would you have had me let him die?" "I would have you seek honest employment," the preacher replied, his thin face rigid with disapproval. He was a tall man, gaunt and severe, with gray threading through his dark hair and eyes that seemed to see sin in every shadow. "The Lord provides for those who walk in righteousness. The Lord has not provided me with any other options," Clara said quietly. "I have applied for every respectable position in this town. No one will hire a woman alone, without family or husband to vouch for her character." "Then perhaps you should have considered that before your father drank himself into an early grave," the preacher said, and Clara flinched as if he had struck her. The scrape of a chair being pushed back cut through the tension like a knife. Clara looked past the preacher to see a cowboy rising from one of the tables near the back of the saloon. She had noticed him earlier when he had come in, had brought him whiskey, and noted the way his eyes were a startling shade of blue against his sun-darkened skin. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with sandy hair that needed cutting and the lean, rangy build of a man who spent his days in the saddle. He wore dusty trail clothes and a gun belt slung low on his hips, and there was something in the set of his jaw that made Clara think he was not a man who backed down easily. "Seems to me," the cowboy said, his voice carrying a slight drawl that marked him as someone from further south, "that the lady just saved a man's life. That takes courage, not shame." Preacher Blackwood turned to face this new challenger, his expression darkening. "This does not concern you, stranger. This is a matter of morality and decency." "Well, I reckon it concerns me when I see a man berate a woman in public," the cowboy said, moving forward with an easy, confident stride. "Especially a woman who was doing nothing but helping someone in need. Strikes me as pretty Christian behavior, actually." Clara watched in amazement as the preacher's face flushed an ugly shade of red. No one challenged Josiah Blackwood in Abilene. He had been the town's spiritual leader for more than a decade, and his word carried weight with nearly everyone who mattered. The mayor sought his counsel, the businessmen contributed to his church, and the respectable women of the town hung on his every sermon. "How dare you?" the preacher began, but the cowboy cut him off with a shake of his head. "No, sir, how dare you?" the cowboy said, and though his tone remained polite, there was steel underneath the drawl. You come in here throwing around words like shame and sin, but you did not lift a finger to help that bleeding man. She did. Seems to me you ought to be thanking her, not condemning her. The saloon had gone completely silent now. Even the bartender, a grizzled former prospector named Dutch, had stopped wiping glasses and was watching the scene unfold with undisguised interest. Clara felt frozen in place, unable to believe that this stranger was defending her against the most powerful man in town. "You know nothing of this situation," Preacher Blackwood said stiffly. "This woman has made her choices. She could seek redemption through honest work and repentance, but instead she persists in this degradation." "She is standing right here," Clara found her voice suddenly, surprising herself with the firmness in her tone. "And she can speak for herself. Preacher, I have tried to find other work. I have knocked on every door in this town. But respectable families do not want a woman with my reputation, and the businesses will not hire someone you have publicly condemned from your pulpit. You have made it impossible for me to work anywhere else, and now you fault me for working here." Something flickered in the preacher's eyes, something that might have been guilt or might have been merely annoyance at being contradicted. Before he could respond, the cowboy spoke again. "Sounds like you have created your own vicious circle, preacher," he observed. "You condemn her for where she works, but your condemnation is why she has to work here. That hardly seems fair." Preacher Blackwood drew himself up to his full height, which was considerable. "I will not stand here and be lectured by a drifter and a saloon girl," he said coldly. "But mark my words, Miss Bennett. Your immortal soul hangs in the balance. I pray you see the error of your ways before it is too late." With that, he turned on his heel and strode out of the Silver Star, the doors swinging shut behind him with a bang that made several people jump. For a long moment, no one moved or spoke. Then Dutch let out a low whistle and the piano player started up again, launching into a jaunty tune that seemed to break the spell. The card players returned to their games, conversations resumed, and the normal din of the saloon gradually reasserted itself. Clara realized she was still standing in the middle of the floor, staring at the doors through which the preacher had departed. She turned to thank the cowboy who had defended her, but he had already started back toward his table. She hurried after him, catching his arm before he could sit down. "Wait," she said, and he turned to face her with a slight smile that made something flutter in her chest. Up close, she could see that he had a small scar above his left eyebrow and that his eyes were not just blue but had little flecks of gray in them, like storm clouds on a summer sky. "I wanted to thank you. You did not have to do that. Could not just sit there and listen to him talk to you that way," the cowboy said with a shrug. "Name's Cole Hartley, by the way. I am passing through on my way to Colorado." "Clara Bennett," she said, though of course he already knew her name from the preacher's tirade. "Why Colorado?" "Got a job waiting at a ranch outside of Denver," Cole said. "Decided to take the long way, see some country I have not seen before. Figured I would rest my horse here for a day or two before pushing on." Clara nodded, trying to ignore the small stab of disappointment she felt at learning he was just passing through. Of course he was. Men like him always were, drifting from one place to another, never staying long enough to put down roots. She had seen dozens of them come through the Silver Star over the years, cowboys and prospectors and gamblers and gunfighters, all of them searching for something they could never quite name. "Well, thank you anyway," she said, releasing his arm and taking a step back. "Can I bring you another whiskey, on the house?" "I would not say no to that," Cole said, his smile widening slightly, "but you do not have to give it to me for free. I can pay." "I insist," Clara said firmly. "It is the least I can do." She fetched the bottle from behind the bar and poured him a generous measure, setting the glass on the table before him. He thanked her and took a sip, and Clara found herself lingering, unsure why she was so reluctant to walk away. There was something about this man, something in the way he had stood up for her without hesitation, that made her want to know more about him. "You did not have to make an enemy of Preacher Blackwood for me," she said quietly. "He has influence in this town. He could make things difficult for you. Cole's expression turned wry. I will be gone in a day or two, remember? He cannot make things too difficult in that amount of time. Besides, I have never been much good at keeping my mouth shut when I see something that is not right. Is that how you got that scar? Clara asked, gesturing to the one above his eyebrow. Cole laughed, a warm, rich sound that made her smile despite everything. No, that was from a ornery calf when I was about 14. My first week working on a ranch down in Texas, and I thought I knew everything there was to know about cattle. Turned out I was wrong. You are from Texas then, born and raised, though I left when I was 17 and I have been moving around ever since, Cole said. Worked ranches from the Rio Grande to the Dakotas. Figured it was time to try Colorado, see if the grass is really greener up in the high country. Clara found herself relaxing, the tension of the confrontation with the preacher slowly ebbing away as she talked with this stranger who had become her unlikely defender. There was an ease to Cole Hartley, a straightforwardness that she found refreshing after years of dealing with men who either leered at her or looked through her as if she did not exist. Clara, Dutch called from behind the bar, we got customers waiting. She glanced around and saw that he was right. The saloon had filled up considerably while she had been talking to Cole, and there were several men gesturing impatiently for service. She sighed and gave Cole an apologetic smile. Duty calls, she said. Thank you again, Mr. Hartley. Cole, he corrected. And you are welcome, Miss Bennett. Clara, she said, matching his informal tone, and then she hurried off to tend to the other customers, very aware of the fact that she could feel his eyes following her as she moved through the crowded room. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of drink orders and rowdy laughter, of breaking up a fight between two miners who both claimed to have staked the same claim, of deflecting unwanted advances with practiced ease. Through it all, Clara found her gaze drifting back to the table where Cole Hartley sat, sometimes playing cards with a group of drovers, sometimes just sitting and watching the room with those storm-cloud eyes. He did not get drunk like so many of the other men did, and he treated her with unfailing courtesy whenever she brought him a fresh drink, always saying please and thank you as if she were a lady in a fine house instead of a saloon girl in a frontier town. It was well past midnight when the crowd finally began to thin out. Clara's feet ached and her head throbbed with the beginning of a headache, but she still had to help Dutch clean up before she could climb the outside stairs to her small room above the general store. She was wiping down tables when she realized that Cole was one of the few remaining customers, sitting alone now and nursing what looked like his third or fourth whiskey of the entire evening. She approached his table with a rag and a cautious smile. "We will be closing soon," she said. "Can I get you anything else before you go?" Cole looked up at her, and there was something in his expression that made her breath catch. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "I suppose so." "Why do you stay here?" Cole asked. "In Abilene, I mean. If the preacher has poisoned everyone against you and you cannot find other work, why not move somewhere else? Start fresh in a town where nobody knows your name." It was a fair question, and one Clara had asked herself more than once during her darkest moments. She set down her rag and sank into the chair across from him, suddenly too weary to remain standing. "I have thought about it," she admitted. "But it takes money to move, to set yourself up in a new place. By the time I pay my rent and buy food and clothes, there is not much left over. And what would I do in a new town? I do not have any skills except serving drinks and keeping books. I would likely end up in the same situation, just in a different place." "You could get married," Cole said, and then immediately looked like he regretted the words. "I am sorry, that was presumptuous of me. I just meant that a woman like you must have had offers." Clara laughed, but it was a bitter sound. "I have had plenty of offers," she said. "Offers from drunks who think a saloon girl will be grateful for any proposal, no matter how degrading. Offers from men who want a housekeeper and a bedwarmer but not a wife, not really. I may not have many prospects, but I have not sunk so low as to accept any of those." Cole nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving her face. "You are right to refuse them," he said quietly. You deserve better than that." Something in his tone made Clara's heart skip a beat. She found herself looking at him more closely, taking in the strong line of his jaw and the way his hair fell across his forehead and the gentleness in his eyes despite his rough exterior. He was handsome, she realized, though not in the polished way of the gamblers or the pretty way of the young ranch hands who sometimes came into town. His was a weathered, earned handsomeness, the kind that came from hard work and honest living. "Why did you really defend me today?" she asked impulsively. "You do not know me, you do not owe me anything?" Cole was quiet for a moment, turning his glass between his hands. "My mother worked in a saloon," he said finally. "After my father died, it was the only job she could get. She was a good woman, a decent woman, but people treated her like she was dirt under their boots. I was too young to defend her then, too small to make anyone listen. I swore when I got older that I would never stand by and let someone be treated that way if I could help it." Clara felt tears prick at her eyes, moved by the honesty in his voice and the pain that lingered beneath the words. "What happened to her?" she asked softly. "She died when I was 16, Cole said. "Pneumonia. She worked herself to death trying to give me a better life, and in the end, I could not save her." He looked up at Clara, and she could see the old grief in his eyes, worn smooth by time but never entirely gone. "When I saw you standing up to that preacher, saw the way you held your head high even though he was trying to shame you, it reminded me of her. She had that same courage, that same refusal to let other people define who she was." Clara reached across the table without thinking and placed her hand over his. His skin was warm and rough with calluses, the hand of a working man. "I am sorry about your mother," she said. "She must have been a remarkable woman." "She was," Cole agreed. He turned his hand over so that his palm pressed against hers, his fingers curling slightly around hers. "And so are you." They sat like that for a long moment, hands joined across the scarred surface of the table, while Dutch clattered around behind the bar and the last few stragglers made their way out into the night. Clara knew she should pull her hand away, should stand up and finish her work and send this cowboy on his way before she let herself start hoping for something that could never be. He was leaving in a day or two, riding off to Colorado and a new job and a life that had no place for a saloon girl from Kansas. But she did not pull away. Instead, she sat there and let herself enjoy the simple comfort of his touch, the warmth of his hand against hers and the kindness in his eyes. Tomorrow she would be sensible. Tomorrow she would remember all the reasons why she could not let herself care about a drifting cowboy with storm cloud eyes. But tonight, just for a few stolen moments, she would let herself imagine that things could be different. "Clara," Dutch called, breaking the spell, "I am heading upstairs. Can you lock up?" "Yes, of course," Clara said, reluctantly drawing her hand back from Cole's. She stood up, smoothing her skirt and trying to ignore the way her skin still tingled where he had touched her. "You should go," she told Cole. "I need to finish closing up." Cole rose as well, dropping a few coins on the table to cover his drinks. "Can I walk you home?" he asked. "It is late and these streets are not always safe for a woman alone." Clara wanted to say yes more than she could remember wanting anything in a long time, but she shook her head, forcing herself to be practical. "I live just across the street," she said. "I will be fine." "Are you sure?" "I am sure," Clara said, though she was nothing of the kind. "Thank you again, Cole, for everything." He studied her face for a moment, and she had the unsettling feeling that he could see right through her, could see all the loneliness and longing she tried so hard to hide. But he just nodded and settled his hat on his head. "Good night, Clara," he said softly, and then he was walking toward the door, his boots echoing on the wooden floor. "Good night," Clara whispered, but he was already gone, the door swinging shut behind him with a soft thud that sounded unnervingly final. She finished her work quickly, her mind only half on what she was doing. She kept thinking about the way Cole had looked at her, the gentleness in his touch, the pain in his voice when he spoke of his mother. She kept thinking about how, for the first time in 3 years, someone had stood up for her. Someone had called her courageous instead of shameful. When she finally locked the saloon door and climbed the outside stairs to her room, she found herself looking toward the hotel where Cole had said he was staying. A few windows were still lit, glowing softly in the darkness. She wondered which one was his, wondered if he was thinking about her the way she was thinking about him. "Stop being foolish," she told herself firmly as she unlocked her door and stepped into the small space that served as her bedroom, sitting room, and kitchen all in one. He is leaving soon. You will never see him again after tomorrow. But as she undressed and lay down in her narrow bed, listening to the sounds of Abilene settling down for the night, she could not quite make herself believe it. Something had shifted today, some fundamental change that she could not name but could feel in her bones. Cole Hartley had called her courageous, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Clara felt like maybe, just maybe, she might actually be. The morning sun was already beating down mercilessly when Clara woke, and she groaned as she realized she had overslept. She dressed hurriedly in her day clothes, a simple calico dress that had been washed and mended so many times it was soft as butter, and splashed water on her face from the basin on her dresser. Her dark hair refused to cooperate, escaping from its pins in wispy curls around her face, but she did not have time to fuss with it. She had promised Mrs. Henderson that she would help with laundry this morning, one of the few odd jobs she could pick up during the day to supplement her saloon wages. She was halfway down the stairs when she saw him. Cole Hartley was leaning against the post at the bottom, his horse tied nearby, looking for all the world like he had been waiting for her. He straightened when he saw her, a smile breaking across his face that made her trip slightly on the last step. "Morning," he said, reaching out to steady her elbow as she stumbled. "I was hoping I might catch you." Clara's heart was pounding, though whether from the near fall or from his proximity she could not say. "What are you doing here?" she asked, trying to sound casual and failing miserably. "I thought maybe I could buy you breakfast," Cole said, "if you have not eaten yet." "I cannot," Clara said, though the words cost her. She had not had anything to eat since yesterday afternoon, and her stomach was growling at the mere mention of food. "I have a job to do, and Mrs. Henderson is expecting me. Mrs. Henderson, the laundry woman." Cole asked, and when Clara nodded, he smiled again. "What if I helped you? 2 people can get laundry done faster than 1, right? Then maybe you would have time for breakfast after." Clara stared at him, unable to believe what she was hearing. "You want to help me do laundry? Why not?" Cole said with a shrug, "I have done laundry before, not well maybe, but I know which end of a scrub board is which." "But you were leaving today," Clara said, confused. "You said you were only staying a day or 2. "I changed my mind," Cole said simply. "Figured maybe Colorado can wait a little while longer." Clara's breath caught in her throat. He had changed his plans. He was staying because of her. The realization sent a warm rush through her chest, equal parts hope and terror. She should send him away, should protect her heart before it got too tangled up in this man who would inevitably leave eventually. But standing there in the morning sunlight, looking into those storm cloud eyes, she found she did not want to be sensible. "Mrs. Henderson will have your hide if you ruin any of her sheets," Clara warned, but she was smiling as she said it. "I will take my chances," Cole said, offering her his arm. They walked through the streets of Abilene together, and Clara was acutely aware of the stares they drew. She saw Mrs. Pritchard, the mayor's wife, cross to the other side of the street rather than pass them. She saw young Tommy Fletcher point at them from his father's store window, his mouth forming an O of surprise. She saw old Mr. Jeremiah tip his hat to Cole but look right through her as if she were invisible. But Cole seemed oblivious to it all, or perhaps he simply did not care. He kept up a steady stream of conversation as they walked, telling her about the ranch in Texas where he had learned to break horses, about the winter he had spent in the Dakotas when the snow got so deep he could not see his own horse's ears, about the time he had won $200 in a poker game and then lost it all the next night trying to repeat his luck. Mrs. Henderson's house was on the edge of town, a sturdy adobe structure with a large yard where laundry lines crisscrossed like a sailor's rigging. The woman herself came out when she heard them approaching, wiping her hands on her apron and squinting in the bright sun. She was a stout, no-nonsense woman in her 50s who had been widowed young and had raised 3 sons on her own through sheer determination and backbreaking work. "Clara," she said, her voice cautious. "Who is this?" "This is Cole Hartley," Clara said. "He is a friend, and he has offered to help us with the laundry today." Mrs. Henderson looked Cole up and down, her expression skeptical. "A cowboy wants to help with laundry." "Yes, ma'am," Cole said, removing his hat politely. "If you will have me, something in Mrs. Henderson's stern face softened slightly. "Well, I suppose I cannot turn down free help, but I warn you, young man, I have very particular standards. If you cannot meet them, you will be more hindrance than help." "I will do my best, ma'am," Cole promised. They worked through the morning, hauling water from the well, heating it over the fire, scrubbing sheets and shirts and dresses on the washboards until Clara's knuckles were raw. Cole kept his word, working steadily and without complaint, though she could see that the repetitive motion of scrubbing was hard on his shoulders and back. He joked with Mrs. Henderson until even that stern woman cracked a smile, and he insisted on carrying all the heavy buckets himself, waving Clara away whenever she tried to help. At noon, Mrs. Henderson declared they had done enough for the day and pressed coins into Clara's palm. Then, to Clara's surprise, she handed a few coins to Cole as well. "You earned it," she said gruffly when he tried to protest. "Fair wages for fair work." As they walked away from Mrs. Henderson's house, Clara felt lighter than she had in months. The coins in her pocket were a welcome weight, and the memory of Cole working beside her, his sleeves rolled up and his hair damp with sweat, made something warm unfurl in her chest. "Now," Cole said as they reached the main street, "how about that breakfast? Or I suppose it is lunch now." "I cannot go to the hotel restaurant," Clara said quietly. "They will not serve me there." Cole's jaw tightened. "Because of where you work." "Because of what people think I am," Clara corrected. "There is a difference between what I actually do and what they imagine I do." "Then we will go somewhere else," Cole said decisively. He looked around and then nodded toward a small building at the end of the street. "What about that place?" Clara followed his gaze and saw he was pointing to a modest establishment with a hand-painted sign that read, "Maria's Kitchen." It was run by a Mexican woman who had come to Abilene 5 years ago with her husband, only to lose him in a construction accident 6 months later. Like Clara, Maria had found herself alone and struggling to survive, and like Clara, she had been judged harshly by the respectable citizens of Abilene for daring to run a business on her own. "They will serve us there," Clara said, warmth spreading through her chest at the realization that Cole had instinctively chosen the one place in town where she would be welcome. Maria's kitchen was small and simple, with just a few tables and a counter where Maria herself worked, cooking on a wood stove and serving her customers with efficient grace. She looked up when Clara and Cole entered, her dark eyes widening in surprise before a smile broke across her face. "Clara," she said, her English accented but clear, "I have not seen you in weeks. Come, sit." They settled at a table near the window, and Maria brought them plates piled high with beans and rice and fresh tortillas still warm from the pan. Cole ate with evident appreciation, complimenting Maria so effusively that the woman actually blushed. "This is wonderful," Clara said, savoring each bite. She had forgotten how good real food could taste after months of making do with bread and cheese and whatever scraps Dutch would let her take from the saloon. "Maria is an incredible cook," Cole agreed. He looked at Clara across the table, his expression growing serious. "Can I ask you something?" "You seem to be making a habit of that," Clara said lightly, but her heart was suddenly beating faster. "The preacher yesterday," Cole said. "He mentioned your father. You do not have to talk about it if you do not want to, but I was wondering what happened." Clara set down her fork, her appetite suddenly diminished. She had known this question would come eventually. It always did, once people started getting close to her. The story of Thomas Bennett's fall from grace was well known in Abilene, whispered about in parlors and discussed in disapproving tones over Sunday dinners. "My father was a merchant," she said quietly. "He owned a general store, a good business that my grandfather had built from nothing. We were not wealthy, but we were comfortable, respectable. I went to church every Sunday in a nice dress, and the other girls in town were my friends." She paused, memories flooding back, bittersweet and painful. "Then my mother died. I was 19. Influenza took her in less than a week." Cole reached across the table and took her hand, just as he had last night, and Clara held on tightly, drawing strength from his touch. "My father could not cope with losing her," she continued. "He started drinking. At first it was just a little at night after the store closed. But then it became more and more until he was drinking during the day, until he was too drunk to serve customers. The business started to fail. He borrowed money to keep it afloat, but he just drank that too. Within a year we lost everything: the store, our house, our reputation. My father died about 6 months after that, his liver destroyed by alcohol, and I was left with nothing but debts I could not pay." "That is when you started working at the saloon," Cole said softly. Clara nodded. "Dutch was the only one who would give me a job. Everyone else in town looked at me like I was something dirty, something shameful. The preacher delivered a sermon about the wages of sin, and everyone knew he was talking about my father, and by extension me." "That is not fair," Cole said fiercely. "You did not do anything wrong. You were just trying to survive. Fair or not, that is how it is," Clara said with a shrug that she did not quite feel. "I am the daughter of the town drunk working in a saloon. In the eyes of Abilene, I am beyond redemption." "Then Abilene is full of fools," Cole said bluntly. Clara felt tears prick at her eyes, but she blinked them back, refusing to cry. She had shed enough tears over her situation. What good did it do? Crying did not change anything, did not make the respectable women of Abilene suddenly accept her, did not bring back her father or undo the damage his drinking had done. "Why are you really still here?" she asked Cole suddenly. "Why did you change your mind about leaving?" Cole was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. "I suppose because I wanted to get to know you better," he said finally. "Yesterday, when I saw you standing up to that preacher, something just clicked for me. I have been drifting for years, never staying anywhere long enough to form real connections, always moving on before things could get complicated. But when I rode into Abilene and I saw you, it felt different, like maybe I was supposed to be here." "You do not believe in fate," Clara said, though it was half a question. "I did not think I did," Cole admitted. "But lately I am not so sure." They finished their meal in companionable silence, and when Cole insisted on paying despite Clara's protests, Maria refused to take his money. "Friends of Clara are friends of mine," she said firmly. "You come back anytime." As they stepped out into the afternoon heat, Clara felt a recklessness take hold of her. She did not want this day to end, did not want to let Cole Hartley slip away. She knew she was being foolish, knew she was setting herself up for heartbreak, but she could not seem to help herself. "I have the afternoon free before I need to be at the saloon," she said. "Would you like to go for a walk? There is a place I want to show you." "I would like that," Cole said, and the warmth in his voice made her feel brave. She led him out of town, following a path that wound through scrub grass and scattered cottonwoods toward a small creek that ran year-round, fed by springs in the limestone rock. It was not much, just a thin trickle of water in a shallow bed, but it was the only green space near Abilene, the only place where the relentless prairie gave way to something softer. Clara had discovered this spot in her first year at the saloon, when the weight of her new life had threatened to crush her completely. She had come here to cry where no one could see her, and she had returned again and again whenever she needed to escape, to remember who she had been before everything fell apart. "This is beautiful," Cole said as they stood on the creek bank, watching the water flow over smooth stones. Dragonflies darted through the air, flashes of iridescent blue and green, and somewhere nearby a bird sang a liquid trill. "It is the only place in this whole dusty town where I can breathe," Clara admitted. "Sometimes I come here and pretend I am somewhere else entirely. Somewhere I do not have to be ashamed." "You have nothing to be ashamed of," Cole said, turning to face her. They were standing close together, close enough that she could see the darker ring around the edge of his irises, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body in the warm air. "Clara, you are one of the strongest, most courageous women I have ever met. The way you have survived, the way you have held on to your dignity despite everything, that takes real strength." "I do not feel strong," Clara whispered. "Most days I just feel tired." "Then let me help you carry the weight for a while," Cole said softly. He reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "I know I am just a drifter and I do not have much to offer, but I would like to stay in Abilene for a while longer. I would like to spend more time with you if you will let me." Clara's heart was racing so fast she thought it might burst from her chest. She knew this was dangerous, knew she was inviting pain and disappointment. But standing there by the creek with Cole's hand against her cheek and his eyes full of something that looked remarkably like hope, she found she did not care. "I would like that too," she said. Cole smiled, and then, slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned down and kissed her. It was a gentle kiss, soft and questioning, and Clara felt something inside her crack open, some carefully guarded part of her heart that she had kept locked away for years. She kissed him back, her hands coming up to rest against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palms. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. Cole rested his forehead against hers, his hands on her waist, holding her steady. "I have been wanting to do that since yesterday," he admitted. "I have been wanting you to," Clara said, surprising herself with her boldness. They spent the rest of the afternoon by the creek, talking and laughing and stealing kisses when the mood struck them. Cole told her about his dreams of one day having his own ranch, a small spread where he could raise horses and maybe a few cattle, nothing fancy but enough to call his own. Clara told him about how she used to love to read before she had to sell all her books to pay her father's debts, how she missed having stories to lose herself in. "What kind of stories did you like?" Cole asked, idly playing with her fingers as they sat side by side on the creek bank. "Adventure stories, mostly," Clara said. "Tales of far-off places and brave heroes. I suppose it was a way of escaping my own life even before everything fell apart." "Maybe one day you will have your own adventure," Cole suggested. "Maybe," Clara said, though she did not really believe it. Adventures were for other people, for men like Cole who could just saddle a horse and ride off toward the horizon. They were not for women like her, trapped by circumstance and reputation in a small Kansas town. But as the sun began to sink toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Clara let herself imagine it anyway. Let herself imagine a life beyond Abilene, beyond the Silver Star Saloon and the disapproving stares and the preacher's condemnation. Let herself imagine riding off into the sunset with Cole Hartley, chasing horizons and building a life together. It was a foolish dream, an impossible dream. But for one perfect afternoon, it felt almost real. When they finally returned to town, the shadows were growing long and Clara knew she needed to get ready for her evening shift at the saloon. Cole walked her to the bottom of her stairs, his hand warm in hers, reluctant to let her go. "Can I see you tomorrow?" he asked. "I would like that," Clara said. "But Cole, people are going to talk. They probably already are. If you are seen with me too much, it could damage your reputation." Cole laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Clara, I am a drifting cowboy with no family and no property. I do not have a reputation to damage, and even if I did, I would not care. Let them talk." "You say that now," Clara said quietly, "but you do not know how ugly it can get, the things people will say, the way they will look at you." "Let them," Cole repeated firmly. He cupped her face in his hands, his eyes serious. Clara, I meant what I said by the creek. I want to be here. With you, whatever that means, whatever complications it brings, I can handle it. Clara wanted to believe him. She wanted it so badly it was a physical ache in her chest. But she had learned the hard way that words were easy and follow-through was hard, that people made promises they could not keep all the time. Still, looking into Cole's eyes, she found herself nodding. "Tomorrow, then," she said. He kissed her again, soft and sweet, and then she was climbing the stairs to her room, her lips still tingling and her heart full of dangerous hope. That evening at the saloon, Clara could not stop smiling. She moved through her duties with a lightness she had not felt in years, humming along with the piano and laughing at Dutch's terrible jokes. Even when some of the customers made rude comments or tried to grab at her, she deflected them with ease, too happy to let anything dim her mood. "You are awfully cheerful tonight," Dutch observed as she collected empties from the bar. "That cowboy have anything to do with it?" Clara felt her cheeks heat. "Maybe." Dutch shook his head, but he was smiling. "Just be careful, girl. I like him well enough, but cowboys are notorious for moving on. Do not go giving him your heart if he is just going to carry it off to Colorado." "I will be careful," Clara promised, though she suspected it was already too late for that warning. The next few weeks passed in a blur of stolen moments and growing affection. Cole found work at her ranch just outside of town, taking on day jobs breaking horses and mending fences, anything that would let him stay near Abilene. He came to see Clara every day, sometimes in the morning to help her with whatever odd jobs she had lined up, sometimes in the afternoon to walk with her by the creek, and always in the evening at the saloon where he would sit at his usual table and watch her work with a small smile on his face. The town noticed, of course. How could they not? Clara Bennett, the shameful saloon girl, was being courted by a cowboy, and the sight of them walking through the streets together or sitting in Maria's kitchen sharing a meal was enough to set tongues wagging for miles around. Most of the gossip was unkind. Clara heard the whispers when she passed, heard the way women would lower their voices and then burst into scandalized giggles. She heard herself called a harlot and worse, heard predictions that Cole would use her and abandon her just like her father had abandoned his responsibilities. She heard Preacher Blackwood deliver a sermon about loose women leading good men astray, though he did not mention her by name. But she also found unexpected allies. Mrs. Henderson invited them both to Sunday dinner, declaring that anyone who could do an honest day's work was welcome at her table, church-going respectability be damned. Maria always had a table waiting for them, and she would sometimes slip extra food onto their plates with a conspiratorial wink. Even Dutch seemed to approve, though he still occasionally warned Clara to guard her heart. Cole bore it all with impressive patience. He ignored the stares and the whispers, treated Clara with unfailing respect and tenderness, and made it clear to anyone who would listen that he considered himself lucky to know her. When drunk men at the saloon made lewd suggestions about what Clara must be like in bed, Cole shut them down with a few quiet words and a steely look that suggested they would be wise not to push the matter. When Preacher Blackwood tried to corner him outside the general store one day to lecture him about the state of his immortal soul, Cole listened politely and then said that his relationship with Clara was between him, her, and God, and he was comfortable with where all three of them stood on the matter. It was after one of these encounters that Clara finally asked him the question that had been gnawing at her. They were sitting by the creek, the late summer heat making the air shimmer, and Clara was using Cole's shoulder as a pillow while he absently braided stems of grass together. It was peaceful and comfortable, and Clara almost hated to break the silence, but she needed to know. "Cole," she said quietly, "what are we doing?" He stilled, his hands pausing in their work. "What do you mean? What is this?" Clara gestured between them, sitting up so she could see his face. "You have been here for weeks now. You have missed your job in Colorado. You are spending all your time with me and people are talking about us like we are courting, but we have never actually discussed what this is." Cole was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. Then he reached out and took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "I suppose I thought it was obvious," he said. "I am courting you, Clara, or trying to anyway. I should have been clearer about my intentions, but I thought you knew." "I hoped," Clara admitted, "but I was afraid to assume. Cole, you know what people think of me. You know what it would mean if you were actually serious about me. You would be tying yourself to someone most of this town considers damaged goods." "I do not give a damn what this town thinks," Cole said fiercely. "Clara, these past few weeks with you have been the happiest of my life. When I am with you, I feel like I have finally found something worth staying for. I do not want to drift anymore. I want to build a life, and I want to build it with you." Clara's breath caught in her throat. "You mean that?" "I mean it," Cole said. He reached up and cupped her face in his hands, his touch infinitely gentle. "I love you, Clara. I think I have loved you since the moment I saw you standing up to that preacher, refusing to let him make you feel small. You are the bravest, kindest, most beautiful woman I have ever known, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving to you that you deserve all the happiness in the world." Tears were streaming down Clara's face now, but they were good tears, happy tears. "I love you too," she whispered. "I have been so afraid to say it, so afraid you would leave, but I love you so much it terrifies me." Cole kissed her then, deep and passionate, and Clara kissed him back with all the love and longing she had been holding inside. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathless and grinning like fools. "So what do we do now?" Clara asked. "I cannot keep working at the saloon forever, and you cannot keep taking day jobs just to stay near me. We need a plan." "I have been thinking about that," Cole said. He looked almost nervous, which was so unlike him that Clara immediately grew alert. "What if we left Abilene?" "Left?" Clara echoed, not sure she had heard correctly. "Hear me out," Cole said quickly. "I have been saving my wages, and I know you have been too. We have enough between us to make a fresh start somewhere new, somewhere no one knows us, where you would not have to carry the weight of your past. We could go to Colorado like I originally planned, or California, or anywhere you wanted. I could get work on a ranch, and you could do whatever you wanted. Maybe open a shop or start a business. Or if you just wanted to keep house and read all day, that would be fine too." Clara stared at him, her mind reeling. Leave Abilene? She had lived here her entire life. It was the only home she had ever known, even if that home had become a prison. The idea of just leaving, of starting over somewhere new, was both thrilling and terrifying. But what about getting married? She asked. "We would need to be married if we were traveling together. It would not be proper otherwise." "Then we will get married," Cole said simply. "Tomorrow, if you want, or today. Right now, Clara Bennett, will you marry me?" It was not the most romantic proposal, delivered sitting on a creek bank with grass stains on their clothes and the sun beating down mercilessly. But it was perfect, honest and direct and utterly sincere, just like the man offering it. "Yes," Clara said, and then louder, laughing with pure joy. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." Cole whooped and swept her up into his arms, spinning her around until they were both dizzy and laughing. When he set her down, he kissed her again, and Clara thought that she had never been happier in her entire life. They made their plans quickly, knowing that the longer they waited, the more chance there was for something to go wrong. They would get married in 3 days, giving them just enough time to arrange the legal paperwork and gather what few belongings they had. Then they would leave Abilene, heading west toward Colorado and whatever future awaited them there. The problem, of course, was finding someone to marry them. Preacher Blackwood would never agree to perform the ceremony, not for a saloon girl and a drifting cowboy, but Cole had a solution for that as well. "There is a circuit preacher who comes through Abilene once a month," he said. "I met him last week at the ranch where I have been working. His name is Reverend Thomas, and he seemed like a good man. Not judgmental like Blackwood. Maybe he would be willing to marry us." Finding Reverend Thomas proved easier than expected. He was staying at the ranch where Cole had been working, and when they rode out to meet him the next morning, he greeted them with a warm smile and kind eyes. Reverend Thomas was an older man, probably in his 60s, with silver hair and a weathered face that spoke of years spent traveling the hard roads between frontier settlements. He listened to their story without interruption, his expression thoughtful, and when they finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "So you want to get married and leave town," he said finally. "May I ask why the hurry?" "Because this town has already decided what Clara is," Cole said bluntly. "They will never see past where she works or what her father did. We want a fresh start, somewhere we can build a life together without that weight hanging over us." Reverend Thomas nodded slowly. "And you, Miss Bennett, are you certain this is what you want?" "Marriage is a sacred covenant, not something to be entered into lightly just to escape a difficult situation." Clara met his eyes steadily. "I love him," she said simply. "I want to marry him not because I am trying to escape, but because I want to build a life with him. The leaving is just practical, a way to give ourselves the best chance of happiness." The Reverend smiled. "That is a good answer," he said. "Very well, I will perform the ceremony. When would you like to do this?" "As soon as possible," Cole said. "We were thinking in 2 or 3 days." "Then let us say 3 days from now at sunset," Reverend Thomas said. "That will give me time to draw up the proper paperwork and give you time to prepare." "Where would you like the ceremony held?" Clara and Cole looked at each other. They had not really thought that far ahead, had been so focused on finding someone to marry them that they had not considered the location. "By the creek," Clara said suddenly. "There is a place just outside of town where the cottonwoods grow. It is the most beautiful spot in Abilene." "Then the creek it shall be," Reverend Thomas agreed. "I will see you there 3 days hence." As they rode back to town, Clara felt like she was floating. In 3 days, she would be Clara Hartley. In 3 days, she would leave behind the shame and judgment and start fresh with the man she loved. It seemed too good to be true, and part of her kept waiting for something to go wrong. But the next 3 days passed without incident. Clara gave Dutch her notice, and though he grumbled about losing his best worker, he pressed extra money into her hand and told her she had better write to him from Colorado. Mrs. Henderson helped Clara sew a simple wedding dress from fabric she had been saving, cream-colored calico with lace at the collar and cuffs. Maria insisted on preparing food for a small celebration after the ceremony, waving away Clara's protests. Cole sold his horse and bought tickets for the stage that would take them to Denver, along with 2 sturdy packs to carry their belongings. He bought Clara a simple gold ring from the jeweler, spending money he had been carefully saving, and when he showed it to her, she cried happy tears. The only real difficulty came the day before the wedding, when Preacher Blackwood showed up at the saloon demanding to speak with Clara. She was upstairs in her room packing her few belongings when she heard the commotion below. Dutch's raised voice, angry and protective, and then the preacher's cold tones cutting through the noise. Clara hurried downstairs to find Dutch blocking the preacher's path, his face red with anger. "She does not want to talk to you," Dutch was saying. "You have done enough damage. Leave her alone." "I will speak with Miss Bennett," the preacher said coldly. "It is my duty as a man of God to try to save her from making a terrible mistake." "I am right here," Clara said, descending the last few steps. "What do you want, preacher?" Josiah Blackwood turned to face her, his expression severe. "I have heard that you intend to marry that cowboy and leave Abilene." "That is correct," Clara said, lifting her chin defiantly. "I have come to urge you to reconsider," the preacher said. "Miss Bennett, I know I have been hard on you, perhaps too hard. But it was only because I wanted to guide you back to the path of righteousness. If you will give up this foolish plan, if you will leave the saloon and commit yourself to living a godly life, I will help you find respectable employment. I will speak to the families of the congregation, convince them to give you another chance." Clara stared at him, hardly able to believe what she was hearing. For 3 years, this man had condemned her from his pulpit, had turned the entire town against her, had made it impossible for her to find any other work. And now, when she was finally about to escape, he wanted to offer help. "Why now?" she asked quietly. Why not 3 years ago when I first needed help? Why not when I was begging for any kind of honest work? The preacher had the grace to look uncomfortable. I admit I may have been too harsh in my judgment. But I believed you needed to see the error of your ways to understand the consequences of sin. The consequences of trying to survive. Clara shot back, anger rising in her chest. Preacher, I never did anything sinful. I served drinks. I kept books. I sang songs. The only sin I committed was being born to the wrong father and having the audacity to try to stay alive after he died. You do not have to marry this cowboy, Preacher Blackwood said, his tone growing urgent. He will only drag you down further. What kind of future can he offer you? A life of poverty, following him from one ranch to another, always moving, never settling. You deserve better than that. What I deserve, Clara said, her voice shaking with emotion, is someone who sees me for who I really am. Someone who does not judge me for things I cannot control. Someone who calls me courageous instead of shameful. Cole is a better man than you will ever be, and I am proud to marry him. The preacher's face flushed red. You are making a mistake. Maybe I am, Clara said, but it is my mistake to make. Now please leave, preacher. You are not welcome here. For a moment, she thought he would argue further. But then he simply shook his head, a look of profound disappointment on his face, and turned to go. You will regret this, Miss Bennett, he said as he reached the door. When he abandons you in some strange town with no money and no prospects, you will remember this conversation. Get out, Dutch said harshly, and the preacher left, the door slamming behind him with a finality that made Clara's ears ring. She stood there for a moment, shaking with anger and residual fear. Then Dutch crossed to her and awkwardly patted her shoulder. You did good, girl, he said gruffly. That took guts. I am so tired of him, Clara said, her voice cracking. I am so tired of all of them, treating me like I am something dirty just because I work here, as if they are so much better than me. They are not, Dutch said firmly. You are worth 10 of any of those so-called respectable folks, and that cowboy of yours, he knows it. You hold on to him, Clara. He is a good one. I intend to, Clara said, wiping at her eyes. One more day, Dutch, one more day and I am free. That night Clara could barely sleep, her mind too full of excitement and nervousness for rest. Tomorrow she would become Cole's wife. Tomorrow she would leave Abilene forever. It was everything she had dreamed of, and yet it still felt surreal, as if it were happening to someone else. The next day dawned clear and beautiful, the late summer heat broken by a cool breeze that promised autumn was not far behind. Clara dressed carefully in her new dress, her hands shaking slightly as she did up the buttons. Mrs. Henderson came to help with her hair, pinning it up in soft curls and tucking small wildflowers into the arrangement. You look beautiful, Mrs. Henderson said, her eyes suspiciously bright. Your mother would be so proud of you. Clara felt tears threaten and blinked them back hastily. She could not afford to cry now, not when she had so much to be happy about. She hugged Mrs. Henderson tightly, trying to convey all her gratitude in that simple embrace. Thank you, she whispered. For everything? The walk to the creek felt like a dream. Maria accompanied her, carrying the basket of food she had prepared, while Mrs. Henderson walked on her other side. Dutch had closed the saloon for the evening and came as well, grumbling that someone needed to give her away since she had no family to do it. When they reached the creek, Clara's breath caught in her throat. Cole had been busy. He had strung lanterns in the cottonwood trees, ready to light as the sun set, and spread blankets on the ground for them to sit on. Reverend Thomas stood waiting by the water's edge, his Bible in his hands and a warm smile on his face. And Cole. Cole stood there in clean clothes, his hair combed back, his eyes bright with emotion as he watched her approach. He looked nervous and happy and achingly handsome, and Clara felt her heart swell with love so intense it was almost painful. You are beautiful, Cole said softly as she reached his side. He took her hands in his, and Clara could feel that he was trembling slightly. So are you, she said, and he laughed, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. Reverend Thomas cleared his throat. Shall we begin? The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. They spoke their vows as the sun sank toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Clara promised to love Cole, to stand by his side through whatever trials life brought. Cole promised to cherish her, to protect her, to build a life with her where she could finally be free of shame and judgment. When Reverend Thomas pronounced them husband and wife, Cole kissed her with such tenderness that Clara felt tears slip down her cheeks. But they were happy tears, joyful tears. She was married. She was Clara Hartley now, and tomorrow she would leave Abilene and never look back. They celebrated with Maria's food and with laughter, the small group of friends who had stood by Clara when the rest of the town turned against her. Dutch told embarrassing stories about Clara's early days working at the saloon, and Mrs. Henderson shared memories of Clara as a little girl, running through the streets with her friends before everything went wrong. Cole sat with his arm around Clara's waist, pulling her close, his eyes never leaving her face. As full dark fell and the lanterns cast dancing shadows on the ground, Reverend Thomas rose to take his leave. "Thank you," Clara said, clasping his hands in hers. "Thank you for giving us this chance." "You gave yourselves this chance," the Reverend said kindly. "I just facilitated it. Go with God, both of you, build a good life together." One by one, their friends departed until it was just Clara and Cole sitting by the creek under the stars. Clara leaned against her husband's shoulder, the words still strange and wonderful in her mind, and listened to the sounds of the Kansas night. "Are you happy?" Cole asked softly. "I am happier than I have ever been," Clara said honestly. "Are you?" "Happier than I knew it was possible to be," Cole replied. He tilted her chin up and kissed her again, slow and sweet. "Ready to start our adventure, Mrs. Hartley?" Clara smiled against his lips. "I have been ready my whole life." They spent their wedding night in Clara's small room above the general store, and in the morning, they boarded the stage headed west. Clara took one last look at Abilene as the town disappeared behind them, at the dusty streets and familiar buildings. She felt no sadness at leaving, only relief and excitement for what lay ahead. The journey to Colorado took weeks. They traveled by stage and by horseback, stopping in small towns along the way to rest and resupply. Everywhere they went, Cole introduced Clara as his wife, the pride evident in his voice, and no one questioned it, no one looked at her with judgment or suspicion. To these strangers, she was just another woman traveling with her husband, unremarkable and respectable. It was a revelation. They reached Denver in early October, and Cole immediately began looking for ranch work. It did not take long. He was good with horses, patient and skilled, and within a week he had secured a position at her ranch about 20 miles outside the city. The owner, a weathered cattleman named Frank Morrison, offered them a small cabin on the property, and Clara felt tears of gratitude prick at her eyes when she saw it. It was not much, just 2 rooms and a fireplace, but it was theirs. Their own home, where no one could judge them or make them feel ashamed. Cole carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing, and then they set about making it into a home. Life on the ranch was hard work but satisfying. Cole worked long hours breaking horses and herding cattle, while Clara kept the cabin, tended a small garden, and sometimes helped Mrs. Morrison with cooking and preserving for the winter. The ranch owner's wife was a practical, no-nonsense woman who seemed to like Clara immediately and never asked probing questions about her past. As autumn turned to winter and snow began to dust the high peaks visible from their cabin, Clara found herself settling into this new life with surprising ease. She had been so afraid that she would not know how to be anything other than a saloon girl, that the labels Abilene had given her would follow her wherever she went. But here, she was just Clara Hartley, ranch wife, and the freedom of that simple identity was intoxicating. Cole was everything she could have hoped for in a husband. He was patient and kind, passionate and tender. He worked hard to provide for them but never made her feel like a burden. He encouraged her to pursue her love of reading, bringing her books from Denver whenever he had to go to town for supplies. On long winter evenings, they would sit by the fire, Clara reading aloud while Cole mended tack or whittled, his hands never quite still. They made love with increasing confidence and joy, learning each other's bodies and desires. Clara marveled at how different it was from what the other girls at the saloon had described. There was no shame in it, no sense of being used or degraded. Just two people who loved each other, expressing that love in the most intimate way possible. By Christmas, Clara realized she was pregnant. She told Cole on Christmas morning, and he swept her into his arms with a whoop of joy that probably woke half the ranch. They held each other close, both of them grinning like fools, already imagining the child they would bring into the world. The pregnancy was not easy. Clara suffered from terrible nausea in the early months, and as she grew larger, the Colorado altitude sometimes made it hard for her to breathe. But Cole was endlessly patient, bringing her water and holding her hair when she was sick, rubbing her swollen feet after long days, talking softly to her belly about all the things he wanted to teach their child. In the late spring of 1879, Clara gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Thomas, after Clara's father, a gesture of forgiveness for the man whose mistakes had set Clara on the path that ultimately led her to Cole. The baby had Cole's blue eyes and Clara's dark hair, and both of them fell completely in love with him from the first moment. Motherhood transformed Clara in ways she had not expected. She had spent so long just trying to survive that she had never really allowed herself to imagine a future beyond the next day, the next week. But now, holding her son in her arms, she found herself dreaming of all the things she wanted for him. She wanted him to grow up free of shame and judgment. She wanted him to know that he was loved unconditionally. She wanted him to see his mother as someone worthy of respect, not as the shameful woman the preacher had called her. Cole was a devoted father, taking Thomas with him everywhere once the baby was old enough, strapping him to his back while he worked and talking to him constantly, even though the child was too young to understand. Clara would watch them from the cabin door, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. The years passed quickly. Thomas grew from a baby to a toddler to a bright, curious little boy who wanted to know everything about everything. Clara taught him to read using the books Cole brought home, and she told him stories about the wider world beyond their ranch. Cole taught him to ride and rope, to respect the animals and the land. When Thomas was 3, Clara gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl they named James and Sarah. The cabin felt suddenly very small with 3 children, but Frank Morrison, seeing how hard Cole worked and how well he managed the horses, offered him a raise and helped them build an addition onto the cabin. The extra space made all the difference, and Clara threw herself into making their expanded home warm and welcoming. Life was not perfect. Money was often tight and the work was grueling. Colorado winters were harsh, and more than once Clara found herself snowed in with 3 small children going stir-crazy from cabin fever. There were times when she was so exhausted from caring for the children and keeping the household running that she fell into bed, barely able to move. But it was a good life, an honest life, and she was happy. One day in the summer when Thomas was 7 and the twins were 4, a letter arrived from Abilene. Clara's hands shook as she opened it, afraid of what news it might contain. It was from Dutch and his handwriting was shaky but legible. The letter contained surprising news. Preacher Blackwood had left Abilene, dismissed by his congregation after it came to light that he had been embezzling from the church funds for years. A new minister had taken his place, a young man with progressive ideas about charity and redemption. The Silver Star was still there, though Dutch was getting older and thinking about selling it. Mrs. Henderson sent her love, as did Maria. They all wanted to know how Clara was doing, if she was happy, if the cowboy had kept his promises. Clara read the letter to Cole that evening after the children were in bed, her voice catching on the parts about the preacher's downfall. She felt no satisfaction in it, only a weary kind of sadness that so much damage had been done in the name of righteousness. You ever regret it? Cole asked when she finished reading. Leaving Abilene, I mean, starting over here. Clara looked around their cabin, at the rough-hewn walls they had made into a home, at the door behind which their children slept safely. She thought about the life she had built here, about the respect she had earned through her own actions rather than inherited through family name. She thought about the man sitting across from her, the cowboy who had called her courageous when everyone else called her shameful, who had loved her enough to build a new life with her. Not for a single moment, she said firmly. She crossed to where Cole sat and settled into his lap, his arms coming around her automatically. You gave me everything I needed, a fresh start, a chance to be more than what they said I was, a family, love. I have no regrets, Cole, not one. I am glad, Cole said softly, pressing a kiss to her temple. Because you gave me everything too, a reason to stop drifting, a home, a family, a purpose. I love you, Clara Hartley. I love you too, Clara murmured, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. As the years continued to pass, the Hartley family grew and thrived. The children grew tall and strong, helped by the clean mountain air and Clara's determination that they would never know the kind of deprivation she had experienced. Thomas developed his father's gift with horses, and by the time he was 15 was working alongside Cole as a full partner. James showed an aptitude for mechanics and numbers that impressed everyone who met him. Sarah inherited her mother's love of stories and could often be found with her nose buried in a book, much to Clara's delight. When Thomas turned 18, Cole made good on his long-held dream. He and Clara had been saving for years, and with Frank Morrison's help and advice, they purchased their own small ranch on land adjacent to the Morrison property. It was not much, just 100 acres with a small herd of cattle and enough horses to make a living, but it was theirs. They built a proper house, larger than the cabin, with room for their growing children and for the grandchildren Clara was sure would come someday. The night they moved into the new house, Clara stood on the porch and looked out at the land stretching before them. The moon was full and bright, casting silver light across the pastures where their cattle grazed. In the distance, she could see the lights of the Morrison ranch, friendly neighbors who had become like family. Cole came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. They stood like that for a long moment, comfortable in their silence, watching the night. We did it, Clara said softly. We actually did it. You had doubts. Cole asked with a hint of amusement in his voice. 1,000 of them, Clara admitted. That day in Abilene, when you first defended me against the preacher, I never imagined this would be where we ended up. I thought maybe we would have a few weeks together before you moved on. I never dreamed we would build this. I knew, Cole said. From that very first day, I knew you were the one I had been looking for. I just had to convince you to take a chance on a drifting cowboy with more dreams than sense. Clara turned in his arms so she could see his face. He was older now, lines creasing his eyes and threading through his hair with silver, but to her, he was as handsome as he had been that day in the saloon. Best chance I ever took, she said, and kissed him. They held each other under the Colorado stars, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life together through sheer determination and love. Clara thought about the girl she had been in Abilene, desperate and judged, and trying so hard just to survive. She thought about how that girl had been called shameful for working in a saloon, for doing whatever it took to keep herself fed and housed, and she thought about the cowboy who had seen past all of that, who had called her courageous instead, who had loved her not despite her circumstances, but because of the strength she had shown in surviving them, who had given her the greatest gift imaginable, a chance to be herself, free from the weight of other people's judgment. Years later, when Clara was in her 60s and Cole's hair had gone completely silver, they received another letter from Kansas. This one was from the new minister in Abilene, a man neither of them had ever met. He wrote that he was compiling a history of the town and had heard stories about Clara Bennett, The young woman who had worked in the Silver Star Saloon and then left town with a cowboy, never to return. The minister wrote that he had interviewed several old-timers, including Dutch, who still ran the saloon though he was ancient now, and Mrs. Henderson, who had passed away peacefully in her sleep the previous winter. They had all spoken of Clara with fondness and respect, praising her courage and her refusal to let circumstances break her spirit. The minister wanted to include her story in his history. He wrote, as an example of someone who had transcended the harsh judgments of her time and built a good life through determination and faith. But he wanted Clara's permission first, and he wanted to know what had become of her. Clara showed the letter to Cole, and they discussed it long into the night. In the end, Clara wrote back, giving her permission and telling the minister about the life she had built in Colorado. She told him about Cole and their children, and now their grandchildren, about the ranch they had built from nothing, about the respect she had earned in their community through years of hard work and honest living. She also told him about that day in the saloon, when a preacher had called her shameful and a cowboy had called her courageous. She told him how that single act of kindness and respect had changed the entire trajectory of her life, how it had given her the courage to believe she could be more than what Abilene thought she was. "Tell my story if you want," she wrote, "but tell it true. Tell people that working in a saloon did not make me shameful. Poverty and limited options are not sins. What made me who I am was not where I worked, but what I did with the chance I was given. I survived. I persevered. I built a life. And I loved and was loved in return. That is what matters." The minister included her story in his history, and years later, Clara's great-grandchildren would find a copy of the book in a library and bring it home to show her. By then she was elderly, her hair white and her hands gnarled with arthritis, but her mind was still sharp and her eyes still bright. She read her own story with Cole beside her, his hand clasped in hers as it had been for nearly 50 years. When she finished, she looked up at her great-grandchildren who were watching her with wide eyes. "Tell us the story, great-grandma," the oldest one begged. "Tell us about the preacher and the cowboy." So Clara did. She told them about Abilene in 1878, about working in the Silver Star Saloon and being judged by the town. She told them about Preacher Blackwood's condemnation and about the day a cowboy named Cole Hartley had stood up for her. She told them about falling in love and getting married by the creek and leaving everything behind to start fresh. She told them about courage and love, and the importance of seeing people for who they really are rather than where circumstances have placed them. She told them about building a life through hard work and faith and partnership. She told them about dreams coming true, not through magic or luck, but through determination and the willingness to take chances. And through it all, Cole sat beside her, occasionally adding details she forgot or squeezing her hand when the memories became emotional. They had lived a long, full life together, and they had no regrets. Clara died on a spring morning in 1925 at the age of 69, with Cole holding her hand and her children and grandchildren surrounding her bed. She passed peacefully, a smile on her face, her last words a whisper of love for the man who had given her everything. Cole followed her 6 months later, his heart unable to continue without her. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking their ranch, under a cottonwood tree that reminded their children of the stories their parents had told about the creek in Kansas, where they had married all those years ago. The ranch continued, passed down through the generations, and with it the story of Clara and Cole. It became family legend, told and retold at gatherings, a reminder of where they had come from and what their ancestors had overcome. And always, always, the story ended the same way. The preacher called her shameful for working in a saloon, but the cowboy called her courageous, and that made all the difference, the end.